Thank you for joining us. I see our participant list is growing as people populate into the live stream here today. So we've got Dr. Michael Graham, and in his integrity, he wanted to make sure I knew that he was not a doctor, but we've given him a CCV honorary doctorate for his time with us here today. But we're really looking forward to the presentation. We'll get into the presentation about 12:10. We're just going to have a little bit of a conversation with Michael here before he gets rolling. And he has let me know that there's a lot of content in this presentation. So we'll go probably 45, 50 minutes on the presentation, and then we'll have some dedicated time at the end for Q&A. So you should have both the chat feature and the Q&A feature available at the bottom of your Zoom screen that you can leverage. And I'll be keeping an eye on those on my second screen here. So as those come in, we'll make sure we highlight those at the end and have some Q&A time. But just as you're thinking about it, go ahead and type those in. That won't mess us up at all, but we'll keep rolling through the presentation and then come back to those questions at the end of our time together. So Michael, just as we're waiting on everybody to come in, I know you're obviously program director at the Keller Center for Cultural, I'm saying cultural engagement because that's our program with the Minery Fellowship. It's cultural apologetics for the Keller Center. I almost said that wrong. So maybe tell us, just while we're waiting on a few people to come in, I know you guys have the TGC annual meeting coming up. You've got some significant programming and some breakouts and some things you guys have done related to that. But we also just promoted one of your cohorts that you guys have launched recently on sexuality and marriage. What are a couple of the other things that you've got? Dive into either one of those, but then what are a couple of the other things you've got coming up for Keller Center that you guys are excited about?
Yeah, so I'm putting the link to kind of our website there, and the best thing to do, if you want to stay in touch, like right after like the top of that page, there's a spot for like basically sign up for our newsletter. We only send out one email a month that basically recaps everything that we did that month, so we don't spam people. But it's probably the easiest way to get a hold of me is that. But I'll put my email also here in the chat as well if anybody wants to get a hold
and
of me that
Michael, I
way.
think here, one second, I'm going to copy paste these because I think those only went to the panelists
Oh,
and hosts.
yep, yeah, all right, yeah, okay. I'm not sure. I don't think I have the ability to maybe message everybody.
Maybe Sam can do that for us. Sam, if you
Yeah.
don't mind, everybody, Sam from my team here on the communications team is with us today as well, kind of helping me run everything behind the scenes as I get easily distracted. But Sam, if you wouldn't mind, and if you've got the ability, if only I have the ability because I'm the host, I can do it, but maybe you can copy paste that and send that out to everybody for us.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so super long story short, the Keller Center is named after the late Presbyterian pastor from New York City, Tim Keller, who wrote a number of things, but most people know him best for maybe his books on marriage, prayer, or reason for God, or making sense of God. And so what the Keller Center is we don't exist to like put any of Tim Keller's stuff out there. What we are is basically a few dozen fellows who have been inspired by the kind of work that Tim was doing pastorally with respect to apologetics. And what does it look like for us to communicate the gospel in comprehensible and compelling ways, particularly in highly secular contexts? And so another way to think about it, it's like if I'm like meeting with like business people who are like trying to, and I'm trying to do like the elevator pitch for like a prospective donor for what we're doing, it's basically we're like the R&D department for a certain type of Protestant, is like another way to put it is like, okay, who's doing R&D, to like how we can communicate the gospel most effectively in kind of a rapidly changing culture and society. We've seen all sorts of shifts politically, in this direction and in that direction. We've seen all sorts of shifts in terms of, most people have been trained, if in our churches in worldview training. Yeah. But the problem is today is most people don't have worldviews anymore. Okay. Mm-hmm. Worldviews up here, right? And so people probably, and there was a time where it's like, oh, I'm this or I'm that, or I'm, I have this particular, like I'm a scientific rationalist, or I'm a materialist, or I'm an atheist, I'm agnostic, I'm from this monotheistic tradition, or I'm a, I'm adherent of, Hinduism or Buddhism or whatever. But like now, people don't even have like coherent like systems of thought where like there's an actual worldview that has a label, So I think a lot of what happens today is people kind of cobble together these micro stories. Internally, we call these cultural narratives. So, you might have a cultural narrative that like explains your morality, and might have a cultural narrative that explains your meaning, and your purpose and identity. You might have a cultural narrative that, helps you think through, family and relationships, those different kinds of things. So, but basically people kind of cobble together stuff. So a lot of what our job is at the Keller Center is to basically help make to be thinking ahead and currently of what are the shifts that are occurring and what do those things mean for us as we try to communicate, the gospel more and more, comprehensively and in ways that are persuasive and compelling. So that's a lot of what we're doing, and we do that in long form essays, podcast audio, video projects, live interactive cohorts. Like you showed the sexuality cohort that we have. Actually, today's the last day to register for the normal version of that, and then we have our our stuff like our national conference. So yeah, actually, there's about to be a price increase on that. So tgc25.org, I can put that link for that. But that conference is primarily for pastors and ministry leaders. So I put that in the, you can pass that along there for that. But yeah, that's most of kind of, what we do. We're a pretty small team. There's just, I'm full time, and then there's 3 other guys that, work 10 or 15 hours each. So.
Okay. Well, and I know this is a little bit parallel or tangential to the conversation we're going to get in today with Rechurching. And everybody, if you were just jumping on, Sam on my team is going to be putting all those links that Michael was sharing into the chat, so you can check those out. The one thing that I'm pretty excited about that I know is still under development are those cultural narratives videos that you guys are working on. I just think that's going to be such a helpful look at the syncretism piece that you were just talking about. And in fact, most of the attendees that are jumping on today are connected into our Minery Fellowship for cultural engagement that we've launched. And we're going through the last 8 chapters of Biblical Critical Theory, Dr. Christopher Walken's book. And this month specifically, in partnership with Arizona Christian University, we're really kind of honing in on that syncretism and how that's impacted worldview or lack thereof, to your point, that it's not really cohesive in any direction, not just the biblical worldview, but nobody really has any sort of a cohesive worldview anymore. It's just kind of cobbled together based on this Carl Trueman Rise and Triumph of the Modern Self. Whatever I like about whatever, I'll just build it in.
Yep.
And so the case study for this month and all the things that we're doing around that are kind of on that piece. So it is becoming, thankfully, I think, a more intentional conversation to highlight that, to recognize that, and to say, how do we unravel that and then help people rebuild, which maybe this does transition or start to transition into our Rechurch, but how do we start to rebuild a comprehensive biblical worldview, and kind of deconstruct this syncretist worldview that so many people have almost accidentally put together just through the influence of social media or education system or whatever it is that they've been influenced by, that they've just kind of tacked on. Even if they call themselves a Christian, and they might be, but from a worldview standpoint, there's so many pieces that have been kind of bolted onto that just aren't compatible with biblical Christianity. And so I love that you guys are doing that. You're putting on some great resources. We regularly share, if you're a subscriber to the Times newsletter, there's almost always something from Gospel Coalition or Keller Center that I'm putting out in there as a resource. So thank you and your team for the work that you guys are doing. I know it's a small team, but you're putting some great stuff together. And I think the fact that you've got national reach goes a long way, right? The people that you're pulling in for your cohorts, the people that you're pulling in for the conference, just leading thinkers in these areas and really helpful resources. So appreciate that. Well, it's 12:10. We're going to go ahead and get rolling with the presentation. Michael, before you bring up your screen and we dive into that, maybe share a little bit of the background, and maybe this is a part of your presentation, but share a little bit of the background, your background as a pastor in Orlando, what was going on that led you guys to write the book, The Great Dechurching. If anybody on the call has not read that, I highly recommend it. In fact, my wife got me a copy before she knew that Michael and I were already connected and having conversations. She was at the TGC Women's Conference last summer and just said, oh, I think this is something Chris would enjoy. And so she picked me up a copy, which was providential in some fun ways to watch God work in that. And so I highly recommend that book, but maybe just tell a little bit of the backstory there of the book, and then what you guys learned from that led you into this Rechurching toolkit and helping be not just identify the problem in the book, but then let's put together a solution for local churches and pastors.
Yeah, so I got most of this stuff baked into my deck, so I'm gonna go ahead and open that up. So give me a thumbs up if you can see that. Okay, Chris. Okay, all right. So yeah, a brief history of our project. Imagine that. So long story short, I was a pastor in Orlando, Florida, and I still live in Orlando, Florida, for over a decade. And I was an executive pastor at the time, and we had run across some 2017 data that had basically said about 2 million of the 4.5 million people in our metro area had dechurched. And that was some data from Barna. And we're like, whoa, hold on. Kind of like one of those like needle on the record, like, like moments of like, okay, hold on. If the third largest demographic in our city behind ethnicity and gender is dechurching, like, well, who are these people? Like, and how do we minister to them? So that led us on in. So I was our executive pastor, and then our teaching pastor was a guy by the name of Jim Davis. And Jim and I wrote this book together, along with Ryan Burge. Let's see, it looks like, yeah. So Jim, I guess it's backwards, but yeah. So we felt like we had this podcast where we did like a season on a topic, and so we'd done an entire season reintroducing our church to the city of Orlando. We did a second season kind of navigating a Christian conversation on race in America. And then we knew that we wanted to do our third season on this dechurching subject because we knew that we needed it to do our job, like as ministers of the gospel in Orlando. And so, so it was my job as executive producer and writer of that podcast to try to digest all available research and writing on dechurching in America. And there wasn't much there. The most recent study was over a decade old. It was 1,000 people. It asked 10 questions. Like we didn't really have, there was no season to be had, to produce on this. And there was nothing actionable that we could like work from. So basically the data, there wasn't enough data. It was old. It wasn't actionable pastorally. We needed data that existed after the fracturing of evangelicalism, after COVID. It needed to be academically credible, and it needed to have insights that would help people, everything from pastors to laypersons. So the most important thing that we learned was this, basically, that we're currently in the largest and fastest religious shift in our country's history. And so what that means is 40 million people have left our churches, and most of that's in the last 25 to 30 years. That's 1 in 6 US adults. So that, just in terms of scale, that's larger than the first Great Awakening, second Great Awakening, and all the Billy Graham crusades combined. So, except, moving in the opposite direction. It's also proportionally, it's also proportionally the fastest shift as well. Fast, 25% faster than any growth period in churching that we've ever experienced. So what does it mean to be dechurched? And just Chris and everybody else who's watching, I'm going to give you this entire deck in PDF format. So you don't need a screenshot. You don't need to take notes or anything. I think this is being even recorded. So just sit back, put whatever questions you have in the chat, and you'll get a PDF of this presentation, and you'll get a PDF of the Rechurching Toolkit as well. So just just sit back and enjoy. Okay, so what is dechurching? It actually didn't have a standardized definition before we did this, so we made one. And yeah, it's arbitrary, but we felt like somebody was dechurched if they didn't, if they had a long-term habit of going to church on a monthly or greater basis, but now go less than once per year. So that's 40 million people, in the United States. What's interesting is that there's 75 million people in America, adults, 75 million adults who go 1 to 11 times per year. So that's your like Christmas and Easter people and, kind of everything in between. So, sidebar, Chris, I don't know if I've even told you this. Like literally next week, Ryan Burge and I have a 100,000 person survey, general population of U.S. adults, asking five to 700 data points per person on. It's going to be the largest religious survey ever done. 3 times larger than the Pew survey that published yesterday. And we're asking way more questions than what Pew did. So I feel bad for Pew because we're about to make their survey obsolete. Sorry, that's the nerd in me. Take it, Pew. So anyways, so that's what dechurching is. We could make these numbers look a lot scarier if we included that whole category, that 75 million people who go 1 to 11 times per year. When we do write about that in the future, we're calling those people the underchurched. So there's 75 million underchurched. So, all right, timeline. Most of that's in the last 25 years. This is kind of what, can you guys see my cursor? Give me a thumbs up if you can see my cursor. Okay. All right. So dechurching looked pretty linear in terms of its growth pattern through the 70s, 80s, and up to early 90s. But things went like NVIDIA stock chart hockey stick, basically from the mid 90s onward. So think like, Nirvana's Smells Like Teen Spirit or REM's Losing My Religion is kind of like the point of inflection, culturally. All right, so here's something that's really interesting. There's a lot going on here. You might have to make your screen, as big as possible to kind of read this really well. But basically, the y-axis here is the percentage of people in various different countries that say religion is very important to them. And then the x-axis is per capita GDP in that country. And so what the blue line is the line of best fit, explaining that this is just secularization thesis. This is a major thesis in sociology of religion. And that thesis is basically, as countries develop economically, they inherently become less religious. And so, but what's odd here is obviously there's one outlier in this entire graph, and it's this green dot here that's the United States. And so there's been so many books and so many dissertations written on this graph of why is the United States stubbornly religious? And there's a lot of reasons why, and we're not going to get into them, but you can email me and I can tell you some things. Okay. 1 in 6, 40 million, 15 of those 40 million people who left evangelical churches. Why did things pick up in the 90s? The fall of the Soviet Union, before 9/11, the biggest enemy of the United States was the Soviet Union. They were godless atheists. But, after 9/11, it was like, oh, religious fundamentalists, did this. So then we had the rise of the religious right. And some people were like, well, if Christianity just equals right-wing politics, then, well, there's not really a place for me. And before the internet, it's like, I'm 42. So like the first half of my life was lived offline and outside. And so if I wanted to interact with new ideas, I would have to have like an in-person relationship with somebody else, or I'd have to go to the library and check out books. And a lot of people just didn't have the proximity to engage with other ideas in really efficient ways. And so the rise of, and the ubiquitousness of high-speed internet really changed the velocity of ideas and the velocity of conversation around ideas. Okay, before we did this research, there were 2 stories that were being told about why all this stuff happened. And so if your media diet leaned a little bit to the left, then the story was, well, it's the church's fault. Racism, misogyny, clergy scandal, clergy abuse, Christian nationalism. Now, if your media diet leaned a little bit to the right, then the story that was being told there is, well, it's the culture's fault. It's secular progressivism, it's the sexual revolution, these kinds of things. And well, which is it? Is it the church's fault? Or is it the culture's fault? Well, both of them are partially true, and both of them are not comprehensive. What we learned, in probably probably one of the most important things about our research was basically that most people left what we call very casually. Okay, and so 30 million of the 40 million people who stopped going to church, they casually de-churched. The top three reasons were: I moved, attendance was inconvenient, and some kind of family change, like marriage, divorce, remarriage, the birth of a child, those kinds of things. Now, can you find like 5 million people who left because of Old Story 1 and Old Story 2? Yeah. But like 30 million people left for, reasons that just don't seem like good reasons to people like us. So now 10 million people left with a high degree of intentionality, with tremendous pain, a lot of hurt, and a lot of that hurt is very valid. So we call those people de-churched casualties. Their top four reasons for why they left were they didn't fit relationally within a congregation, suffering in their life, some kind of church hurt, some kind of clergy scandal. So just at the highest altitude, those are the two different types of de-church people that you're dealing with. Now, I do want to zoom in on just the 15 million people who left evangelical churches. I am clergy, from an evangelical context, Baptistic, not in a denomination, but anyways. But before I do that, before zooming into those 15 million evangelicals, there's basically like three levels of need that every de-church person kind of roughly fits into bucket wise. Some people just need a nudge from us. And these are people who are probably, in Christ, regenerate. They've just gotten out of the habit, probably felt relatively recently, of going to church. Then there are people who have been out for a little bit longer. They're not ready for the front door of the church, but they're probably ready for the side door of the church. And the side door of the church probably looks like your dinner table or some other form of hospitality. And then there's a third category of people who are very far and probably have significant pain or hurt. And apart from the Holy Spirit working on them through your relationship with them, they're probably not going to return. So these are people who are very far, and you just need to have a lot of patience, a lot of prayer, and a lot of perseverance. Okay, so I'm going to, just for the sake of brevity, there's a ton of statistics here. I'm going to gloss over pretty much all of it and hit these very, very high altitude. You have the presentation. You can look at it for yourself. And look, if you think that this is comprehensive, there's 10 times more information, in the book. I'll put a link to that in the chat as well. All right. Highest altitude, 15 million people who left out of evangelical churches. This first category here of cultural Christians, this is 8 million people. And then categories 2, 3, and 4 are between 2 and 2.5 million people each. Okay. The cultural Christians were a little bit more male than female, middle-aged. They left a little over a decade ago. They are almost monolithically white, high degree of marriage. The American dream is working for them, and that's what they live for. These folks live for the American dream. 1% of these people say that Jesus is the Son of God. Okay. These people are not regenerate today. They're not followers of Jesus. They have a relatively low view of the Bible. But over half of these people are willing to return to an evangelical church today. Okay. They are center-left politically, yet they are not racially sensitive. So, look, sometimes the labels that we put on people and the underlying realities are a lot more complex. This is why data is helpful, because data is almost always better than narratives, because narratives tend to oversimplify and data tends to give us greater complexity to things. And that greater complexity is our friend. So anyways, all right. You guys can read this on your own of why they left, but these people did not leave for great reasons. It's a lot of casual reasons with just a few casualty reasons kind of sprinkled in. Now, why would they be willing to return? 6 of these 8 things are relational. So You just want to look at that and get a sense of that. But it's like, look, at the end of the day, none of this stuff, everybody who's listening, none of this stuff is rocket science. Here's what, at the highest altitude, people are just looking for two things. They're looking for healthy relationships and a healthy local church. And you know what? Those two older stories, could I do anything about racism, misogyny, clergy scandal, clergy abuse, political syncretism, Christian nationalism, sexual progressive, and secular progressivism? I can't do anything about any of that stuff. Maybe like in my neighborhood, I can do I can make a difference on one of those things and maybe in my community. But like, can I control the way I relate to other people? Yes. Can I take risks in the relationships of the people that God is putting in front of me? Yes. Can I work to create a healthier local church? Yes. So the good news in the middle of all this bad news is like, well, those old stories, we had no power, we had no agency, we had nothing that we could do. But the good news is that, well, most of the people who left are willing to return. And most of the people who left don't have unrealistic expectations. They're just looking for good people in a healthy church. And so both of those things are very much well within our power to be able to do something about. Okay, moving forward. All right, cultural Christians, you can see they need sincere community, mental health help. Their doctrine is terrible. They need spiritual formation. And we got to engage these folks better between the ages of 18 and 39. Mainstream evangelicals. These people are clearly Christians. You're going to see it in a second. They're the same age as that first group, but they left around the time of COVID. They are far more female than male. Still relatively monolithically white at 91%. Average income, average education. But look at this, 98%, Jesus is the Son of God. Their orthodoxy score, and this is basically like Nicene Creed level Christianity, their orthodoxy score is better than people who still go to church. And they have a higher view of the Bible than evangelicals who still go to church. So they're center-right politically, but they are more racially sensitive. Again, narratives, complex, data. So these folks, they left for very casual reasons. They're the only group that COVID impacted. Almost all de-churching happened before COVID. Almost nobody de-churched because of COVID, oddly enough. But yeah, number one, I moved. Number two, attendance was inconvenient. Number three, divorce, remarriage, other family change. What these people need is a mixture of healthy church, relationships, and the Holy Spirit is clearly working in their heart. God tells them to go back in a significant way. They begin to miss church. They find a church that takes doctrine and ethics seriously, feel the distance from God, those kinds of things. So these folks are just nudge folks. If you here's how you know if you found somebody who's in this profile. Super simple. Maybe you're at your kid's sports game or cul-de-sac, at the end of the day, having the driveway conversation with other people on your street, other parents, whatever, or you're at the PTA at school. And when you're having a conversation with somebody, here's how you know if this person is in this profile. You find, it seems like the person is kind of like a person of faith or spiritual. They have, look, people who are, who have evangelical background, there's certain vernacular. You can pick it up if you just pay attention to like the words that people use. But but in the course of conversation, you're like, oh yeah, are you a person of faith? And they're like, oh yeah, I'm Baptist or whatever. And you say, oh yeah, what church do you go to? Here's how you know instantly whether this person's in this profile. You ready? They go, when you ask them what church you go to, they go, ah. The moment you hear the you know that Tommy's been doing travel baseball, and we haven't been, and we've been one time in the last year. We used to go to church. And as soon as he graduates, we're going to be right back there. That's when you're in this profile. All this person needs, all you got to do is just nudge them. You just got to invite them back to church. That's it. 100% of the time, this person will come back to church. They just need a little bit of a nudge. That they have the Holy Spirit inside of them. The Holy Spirit's already convicting them, and you're just going to be the person that just kind of pushes things over the edge. That's it. All right, ex-evangelicals. just read the chapter in the book on this one. This is a really painful group. Overwhelmingly female, 2/3 female. These folks left over 20 years ago. Typically when you hear that term evangelical, it's like somebody who's like highly online, progressive, left wing, female, college educated, younger, upwardly mobile, and that person exists in this profile, but that person's only maybe 1 in 5 of the people who are in this group. Okay, most of the people who are in this group are people who are females who have just middle-aged females where America is not working for them. None of it. It's not working for them politically. It's not working for them economically. It's not working for them maritally, education. All of its institutions are failing them, and they are really struggling in life. And religion is just one of those things, and evangelical church is one of those things. Now, we called this group this because 0% of this group is, the second group, the mainstream evangelicals, 100% of them willing to return to an evangelical church today. This group, 0% are willing to return to an evangelical church today. Now, 79% are willing to go to a Christian church of some kind, but they're not willing to go back to an evangelical expression of the faith. The good news about that is, I don't know what it's like in your particular communities and how many, what the makeup of, in your community is, but we have some really healthy churches that wouldn't be in an evangelical denomination that are very gospel centered. So for example, the Episcopal Church, the Episcopal Diocese here in Central Florida is one of 3 dioceses in America that is dissenting from the broader denomination on all the gender and sexuality confusion. And so there are, the clergy here are great. There are a number of really great churches. And so every time we find somebody in this profile, we make a connection there. We also have good connections with a number of Black Protestant pastors where it's like, okay, the doctrine by and large between our churches are more or less the same. And yet there is not the cultural baggage for, in those Black Protestant churches that there is in, churches like ours. And so we just have, so when you come across people who are in this profile, have great relationships with other clergy in your city and know where you'd send somebody, where they're not going to have where they can worship Jesus and not have, some of the evangelical baggage kind of associated with that. So but check this out. Look at this. 97% of this profile, Jesus is the Son of God. Okay. Second highest on this, second highest orthodoxy score, second highest view of the Bible. So it's really interesting. These folks are 5 times as centrist, so politically independent, not affiliated with either of the 2 major parties. They're very allergic to racism. They're very allergic to politics, very allergic to misogyny, and very allergic to the relationship between church and state being close together. And their reasons why they left were all pain-centric. There's a 4th profile here. You guys can read all this stuff. It's just absolutely riveting. You got to read the book on this one. 2.5 million BIPOC. BIPOC stands for Black, Indigenous, and Persons of Color. So this group, oddly enough, was 0% white. Now, we get a big data set, and then you hand that data set off to basically an AI thing that it's called machine learning, and it's just a fancy way to say what the machine learning thing does is, okay, here's these 600 data points on these 7,000 people. These 20 variables are the most important. We want you to build clusters, constellations of people that have mathematically, statistically similar answer choices. Okay, so all of these profiles weren't hand put together by us. We want to be mathematical about these things, and we want people to be very, very tight in their clusters. Okay, so what's interesting is when we fed the machine learning algorithm the data set, it did not have the ability. We didn't let one of those 20 variables that it was sorting based on to be race or ethnicity.
Hmm.
So these profiles were created with the algorithm not being able to see race or ethnicity, and without the ability to sort on it. Okay. So
Yeah.
it's interesting that the first profile is 98% white, and this fourth profile is 0% white. Okay. What folks like Ryan and I would say is that ethnicity casts a long shadow. And if you've had many relationships with people who are of a different race or ethnicity than you might understand that there can be different Americas, and the ways that in which people experience, America and its institutions can look and feel different. Now, here's what's fascinating. This group, highest income, highest education of all of the four profiles. These folks are making mid six-figure average incomes, extremely upwardly mobile. And when you put 76% Black with 68% male, 52% of this group, so 1.25 million of this group, are extremely affluent Black men. Now, they left right before the Y2K, the turn of the millennium. And look at this. This is crazy. All right, so their average age, look at this, 51, now 54, because this was 3 years ago. 92% work full time. When you go back and look at the other full time work rates of the other profiles, this is off the charts. So this is very hardworking, upwardly mobile Black men. So now bear in mind, they have a pretty high view of the Bible for people who've been out of church for over 25 years. And these orthodoxy scores aren't great, and this view of Jesus is not great. But the longer you are out of church, the more these numbers, they just erode over time. There's basically nuclear half-life, if radiation being emitted. So interestingly enough, this group is not super racially sensitive, and they trend. They do look a lot like the rest of, particularly Black folks in America, of being centrist to center left. So, I mean, and that's part of why Harris lost. It's because she misread. She misread a lot of things, but not trying to get political here. Okay, I am nonpartisan. I did not vote for either of the two major candidates, so there's that. So I can say these things. Okay, you can.
It's just a data set kind of comment.
Yeah, it's just a data set. Yeah. Okay, and but when you get to so 2/3 of these people are willing to return to an evangelical church. Can you imagine having any habit in your life that you haven't done for 25 years and being like, yeah, I'd do that again? 25 years later. So and when you see this, you see 7 of these 8 things are relationships. So anyways, so these folks need cultural emotional intelligence from us, deep friendship, obviously sound doctrine and spiritual formation. They left earlier than the other profiles. So the engagement here is more in the 13 to 30 age range than the 18 to 39. So I'm going to skip the mainline. You guys can read that for yourself. When you read mainline, it's basically the same as Roman Catholic. So mainline and Roman Catholic folks de-churched in the 80s and 90s. They're still de-churching, but by and large, we're getting back to what Ryan Burge calls the bedrock of American, the baseline of American religiosity. So it's our contention that we've probably already reached peak de-churching. I'll have a definitive answer to that in about 6 weeks with this new survey. But at some point, just like a COVID spike, you don't have enough people to infect anymore with a new variant. So in some ways, you only had a certain population of people who were churched on a monthly or greater basis. So once you erode so many of those people out of that population, well, there's no more people to get the de-churching virus. So eventually the spike goes down. But what happens a generation after a de-church spike, in our opinion, is that you get an unchurched spike. Because what do two de-churched parents raise? They raise an unchurched kid. And so the de-churching problem is going to lead to an unchurching problem in a generation. So the same spike that we see, on de-churching, we're going to start to see that unchurched thing, continue to rise. All right, you guys can read that stuff on your own time. All right, a couple myths. People just leave because of negative experiences. That's not true. We already covered that. Young people leave because of secular university. Only 3% of people who were evangelical and had a graduate degree end up de-churching. So if you got a graduate degree, you are 7 times less likely to de-church. And if you grew up in an evangelical church than somebody who just had high school or some college. So going to church has become a middle or upper middle class phenomenon. So the most likely people to go to church is if you're married, you have children, and you have a college degree. So if you do those things, you're probably, in America, you're probably churched. Things really erode when you pull away any one of those things. So of the 15 million people who left evangelical churches, it looks like about 5 million of them still have Nicene Creed level Christianity intact. 10 million do not. So it's more complicated than, these people left the faith. Most people recently have not left on the secular left. Most people who are leaving recently are de-churching on the secular right. So think like politics replacing religion for many people. De-churching on the secular right has been occurring at twice the rate currently than de-churching on the secular left. Now, you can make the argument that that's because the people who were de-churching on the secular left, they left, in the 90s, when, it became culturally acceptable to no longer be like self-identify as Christian. There's some credibility to that, but when you compare the total number of people who have left on the one side versus the other, it's basically about even now. So we have to be careful we have to be able to lead in multiple directions. And do I have deep concerns about secular progressivism from a political standpoint? Absolutely. But we also have to be careful that, people can find meaning, identity, and purpose in things that aren't Jesus, and those things can be political in nature. And so we don't want to lose people to, worshiping like the kingdom of America more than the kingdom of Jesus. So people aren't willing to come back. That's a myth. Yeah, most people are willing to. A little over half are willing to come back. America's peak religiosity was around the time of our founding. Only 17% of Americans went to church in 1776. So we are 3 times as churched today as what we were at our founding. So I could talk about that for an hour. I won't. De-churching primarily happens to the upwardly mobile. No, it's the exact opposite. Once you get in, like, basically the sweet spot for going to church is if you are 40th to 80th percentile income in America. Going below 40 or above 80, things start to drop off. All is lost. That's not a myth. There's tons of low-hanging fruit. The number one thing I want to inspire anybody on here on is really just this: take relational risk. Mm-hmm. Most of the people that you talk to, they want to talk about these things, and you're not going to lose the relationship. And look, just read people's body language and context clues. You'll know, if this is off the table and not an okay subject, you'll know, you might not know the difference between somebody who needs a nudge and needs your dinner table, but you're going to know the difference between somebody who needs a nudge and where it's years and decades of relationship. So just read the room. And how do I know who God wants me to take relational risk with? Here's what I want to say. I'm always of the opinion that the people that God wants us to invest in are the people he just keeps putting right in front of us over and over again. So what I want you to do is write down the name of somebody who God keeps putting right in front of you. And I don't care whether they're near, medium, or far away from him, but take the next step in relational risk with that person, in spiritual conversation or inviting them to church, And listen, I at this point, I literally have hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands, of stories of people who are just like, they just like, they read something or they watched a thing or an interview or whatever, and like, yeah, I talked to my neighbor Tom and I invited him to church because I realized like, oh, he was in that one profile that was like the easiest one. And so I just did it, and they came and we had barbecue after church, and now he's in our community group, like just stuff like that. Just so take relational risk. Okay. All right. I'm going to leave this stuff for you guys to there's like these six key awarenesses of like God awareness, self-awareness, others awareness, awareness of how other people are experiencing you, emotional awareness, and cultural awareness. When you add those things up, people begin to experience you as being persuasive and trustworthy. And so you get investing in student ministry is key. Obviously, that time of 13 to 18 and 18 to 39 is really key. Make sure you're doing that in your churches. Mental health is an avenue. So de-church people are in way worse mental health than people who go to church. You can look, these are things like anxiety, depression, loneliness, suicidal thoughts. We talk about this in page 29 and 30 in the book. And there's a Harvard professor who runs the Harvard Center for Human Flourishing. I don't know if he's a Christian or not, but he's got really interesting research. And basically his research is like, he has definitively shown from like a health and mental health standpoint that weekly or greater congregational religious attendance is worth to your body the equivalent of stopping smoking of 2 packs a day.
Yep.
So whatever that health benefit is of like going from 2 packs a day to becoming a non-smoker, like weekly church attendance is worth the same thing. Rebecca McLaughlin is writing an entire book on this subject that I think we'll be publishing in October 28th of this year. So on basically the physiological and mental health benefits of being a person of faith. So his stuff is worth looking at. Look, develop relationships with good counselors in your area. Maybe have some lunches, invite some counselors in your area so that you can know like, oh, so-and-so is good at, doing EMDR or family stuff, or this person's good with kids with autism or kids who are neurodivergent, or, this person's good with marriage and, whatever. It's just good to have, some of those things in place, because you never know, like, sometimes that the dinner table or the side door of the church might actually be something like this. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
You got a neighbor or a friend who's just struggling, they're de-churched or unchurched or, far from Jesus, but like, there's just something going on in their life, and you've got a good place for them to go and get some help. And you're introducing them to somebody who, loves Jesus and is going to have some of that in their practice. All right. 4. Look, we have a big gospel, and it's true, it's good, and it's beautiful. It's head, it's heart, and it's hands. It's normative, it's situational, and it's existential. It's all of those things all at the same time. And so, in the 20th century, apologetics was centered around, is Jesus true? But a lot of the questions that we see today are more questions about like, well, is Jesus good or is he beautiful? Does he have a plan for human flourishing? Those different kinds of things. So this is why I think it's important for the field of cultural apologetics. Kind of classical apologetics is kind of more focused on this question of like, is Jesus true? But cultural apologetics seeks to really kind of also answer the questions of, is Jesus good and is he beautiful? And so there's all sorts of ways. We have all sorts of resources about how to, you can just go to the kellercenter.org and, how to incorporate cultural apologetics into your preaching, into your ministries, and yeah. So, look, we don't have to be at the top of the power pyramid in our country in order to be, effective and persuasive. When you look at church history, that hasn't been the normative, case that we've been in most of our time. Does that mean we abandon the public square and those different kinds of things? No. Does that mean we don't have, thoughts on policies and those different kinds of things? No. But we don't have to be in control in order to be effective. So, I'm going to leave all this pink stuff on challenges for church planting and church growth. You guys can look at that on your own time. I want to get to this Rechurching toolkit because this is the meat of probably the bread and butter of why we're here. All the rest of that is just kind of preamble for this. All right, so you're going to have this PDF. I just want to show you how to use it, okay? So This thing is basically two things in one document. The first thing is an audit, a 20-point audit of how are we doing on these key areas. Every one of these areas relates to areas of why people dechurched. Okay, all of this is based on like stuff that we're seeing in the data. Okay, so we felt like, okay, the book was largely like 70-30, like a resource to help individuals. 30% of it's relevant for like institutional church leaders, pastors, clergy, denominational leaders, network leaders. But we wanted to create a resource just for from 2 local church pastors to other local church pastors, so that they had just rails to run on of like, okay, Mike, can you just find some easy stuff that we can do in our church to make a difference on this in our community? So that's why we created this. It is the most nuts and bolts thing that you are ever gonna see, published by me or Jim. So without further ado, okay, this is, and everything. So the audit comes in 3 categories. We want to help. This resource is helping you open the front door, close the back door, and send out the your church body better equipped. So I think I'm missing I put the wrong thing in here. Anyways, I'm missing the one that says close the back door. But anyways, so you get an idea of like the kinds of questions that we're asking. So the point of this is you get together with your leadership team, whatever your polity is, elder board, session, deacons, vestry, you name it. You get together with that group of like your leadership team, and you sit down and you make everybody sit down and just check, how are we doing on this area? Yes, no, or needs work. Then you're going to appoint the person in the room who's the best at project management. That maybe that's a staff person, or maybe, a pastor, or maybe that's somebody who's like, hey, I do project management for KPMG or whatever, consultant or whatever. But whoever's best at project management, you're going to have them lead you through this. And so you're going to basically tally up everybody's, assessments on the audit, how many yeses, how many nos, how many needs work for each thing. And you're going to basically see, okay, where are the areas for improvement? And then that person who's best at project management, they're going to look at all the things that are like no's and needs works. And they're going to say, which of these is the easiest for us to pull off? And basically on a monthly basis, take 30 minutes of your leadership team once a month from then on to tackle you make some progress on one issue at a time. This is stuff that you don't have to fix in, a month, a quarter, or even a year. You can spend 5 years on this stuff and just kind of making slow and steady improvements. The beauty of a local church is it's institutional. And so you don't have to like fix everything right at once. Slow and steady wins the race. So if you, begin to improve your systems and structures, kind of one thing at a time, this is stuff that will bear fruit for decades. Okay, long after you're dead or you're not at the church anymore, like you set an institution on a particular direction and it's going to bear fruit for a long, long period of time. So you can kind of get a sense of like, okay, what's there in the audit? That's the first half. Okay, that's the first part of this. The second part of this is, okay, Mike, what do I do once we identify there's an area that needs work? Well, I'm glad you asked. So here's an example. Okay, so for every one of those 20 things, we have like a 1 to 2 page worksheet, like a project management checklist of like, well, we failed on this one. Okay, Mike, what do we do? Okay, well, good. We have all sorts of ideas on, each thing will tell you why is that particular, of those 20 things, why is it relevant for dechurching? What are some other things that you can look at or read? And then a checklist of basically action items of things that you can do to make some progress if you don't have any rails to run on. So now you don't have to follow any of our recommendations. You're going to know your communities better than, what we do. So we tried to make everything that we recommended here, we tried to make to be relevant for any tradition and in any type of context. Okay. And, any way that you could slice people up, we wanted to make it as, broad as possible. So you can fine tune that to, you're going to know your community way better than, than what we would. So that's it for, I'm just going to open this up for Q&A and stop screen sharing here. Yeah. Oh, good. We got 20 minutes. Good.
Oh yeah, well done.
Yeah.
That was a lot of content to fly through, and thank you. Just in case, I know we had a couple people jump on a little bit late. If you missed it, Michael's not only going to provide that entire slide deck, but also we have the PDF of that Rechurching toolkit that we'll make available to everybody. So you'll be getting that in a follow-up email, and then once we get this posted on the website, we'll also have the links there for anybody who comes back to watch this. Is that the link? I just saw the Amazon link.
Yeah, that's the Amazon link. Yep. Yeah, if you want to pick up the book, you can do that there.
Perfect. Sam, if you don't mind dropping that in for everybody as well. I think it again just came to the panelists. So I have a couple questions. I know we have a couple that have been posted, and if anybody else has any, go ahead and type those in. First of all, I'm really interested in this new survey that you guys work on. I know you said it's going to be available in about 6 weeks. Where would we go to access that? And then a follow-up question that somebody else had written in. Would there be a way to isolate, like Ohio, if we wanted to start saying, okay, Ohio churches, right? Here's this whole big data set that there's can we isolate some of that data for an Ohio specific report?
Yeah, so
If
I'm texting you an image here. I don't know if we can actually. Let me just share this because I don't think you can do images in this. So I'm going to share this with you. So if you want to get a sense of like what here's all the things that we're asking. So basically, these are 13 demographics. We're getting a full religious history on somebody. So imagine, what tradition were you in? How frequently did you go? What did you believe about Jesus and the Bible and ethics and these kinds of things? And we ask you that answer this from when you were 0 to 12. Answer this from your attitudes when you were 13 to 17. Answer this when you were 18 to 29, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, and 70 plus. So we're going to get every 100,000 people's individual religious history of how did they migrate in terms of how they thought about, church, tradition, frequency, doctrine, all that kind of stuff. And then we have all these things on, kind of family and health. So the Harvard, this is Tyler Vanderweel's questions, the standardized test for childhood trauma, the ACE score, all sorts of questions about what kind of family they grew up in, parenting styles, their parents' religion, family size, introversion, extroversion, addictions, mental health index, how's their life doing, where do they go for help, and then all sorts of stuff about culture and society. How do they consume information, all their political stuff, what do they think about institutions in the country, attitudes towards key people, attitudes to other religions, other ideas, other practices, gender stuff, all that kind of stuff. So this is going to be a watershed. This survey will be 3 times larger than anything that's ever been done before, and it's far more comprehensive. Also, in the number of questions that we're asking, we'll have 500 to 700 data points per person. So, and you see down here, see this thing zip code. You never get this granularity. Typically, it's like, oh, what region of the country are you in, or what state? We'll know zip code, and so we will be able to produce for the top 20 to 30 metro areas, reports on any of them and any state in the country. In other words, any part of the country that's more than a half to 1% of the population, we can produce a report for that part of the country. So what Ryan and I need, I'll send you. I can send you a PDF to this end as well, because I got something on this. We want to be producing reports ideally for every one of those metro areas and then any state. But it's really time consuming on Ryan and my part. But we are going to be writing 2 books on this, on what we learn on that. One will come out in 2027, and then the other one will come out in 2029. The first book will be about people who converted to Christianity as adults, or people who dechurched and then rechurched. The second book will be about the 90 million people who have never had a church going habit ever. So we think there's a lot of low hanging fruit in both of those groups. The first group we want to study because we feel like, oh, those are people who made good decisions.
Yeah.
So what happened in their life that that came before that they made those decisions? And we think that some of these people made some of these good decisions. There's probably more who do something similar. And then among the never churched, we think that there's, sometimes you're so far away from Jesus that you're actually really close. Because it's like, I mean, what, is caffeine in the morning and, melatonin or, Ambien at night, sugar addiction throughout the day and, porn addiction. Like, are these things going to like satisfy me? Or like, are they going to, it's like, I think this is why we're seeing all sorts of like unlikely people converting to Christianity right now. It's like, we've never had more technology and we've never had more ability to be connected to other people. And it's like, now that we have all this cool stuff and we're like, yeah, this is hollow and it's not helping me. So I think there's a lot of opportunity among that never churched, those 90 million people. So
feels like we're a little bit of an Acts 17:18, Paul in Athens, altar to the unknown God moment where people they've been sacrificing everything to this altar of the unknown God, and they just need somebody to say, you want me to tell you what you're really trying to, Pascal, you want me to tell
that's
me
right.
Really
Yep.
this guy avoid? So that'll be huge. That's exciting. So you started to say what you'll need from us because it's going to take a lot. Was there something?
Oh yeah. These reports are time consuming. They're relatively speaking, we're able to produce these reports for about 10 cents on the dollar on what Barna and others have done, over the years, but it is still kind of expensive. So, but I'll send you a thing to that end.
Yeah, that was a PDF.
So,
okay.
But I mean, imagine a report that tells you, hey, here's the 6 to 10 spiritual profiles, in your metropolitan area. And here's what each of these people are into. Here's their demographics. Here's what they're allergic to. Here's the aspects of the gospel. Here's the gospel metaphors that will speak most powerfully to them. Here are the things that, are very off-putting, for them. It's incredible information. And so when we produce those reports, unlike a lot of these other places that do religious data, those reports will be completely open intellectual property. So you want to publish that far and wide and give it away to anyone and everyone. Awesome. Please do that. We'll help you. We'll help you get it out to, everybody who's in that area. So we really think that those reports will do even more good than the next two books that we'll write, because we think that information is far more contextual and communal, and will give people better information to be able to do, the ministry choices and the philosophy of ministry and doing contextual ministry even better.
Love it. So next question, and this is kind of, again, combining one that was written in with something that I had been curious about. So we did an event with Aaron Wrenn at one of our churches a little while back. He was talking about his 3 stages of evangelicalism and how that now we're in this kind of post-evangelical. And one of the comments he made was that we've seen a lot of people, somebody asked, it seems like there's a lot of people moving to the Catholic Church. And he actually said, well, I'm seeing even more move towards the Eastern Orthodox Church. So one of the questions was going back to, I think it was your ex-evangelicals, and that they're more likely to go to a different orthodoxy or style than to come back to an evangelical church. You mentioned a couple of those, Episcopal and some of the Black Protestant churches. So that, I think this is when that question came in. They said, well, would they be open to a Catholic church? And then that got my wheels turning on Aaron Wrenn and the Eastern Orthodox Church. And so have you guys seen some trends in that direction as well for individuals who say, evangelical, I've got a bad taste in my mouth for whatever reason?
So we will have, for the first time ever, one of the holy grails in religious data, and that is a comprehensive spiritual migration map. So we will know when people, what people started with, how they evolved, and where they're at today. What percentage, what traditions are sticky, which ones are not. What are the inflows and outflows in each tradition, at what age, for what reasons, what were the beliefs at the time of entry and exit. We'll know all that stuff.
Mhm.
So right now, I would say I'm hesitant for a lot of that kind of analysis, because a lot of it is just basically licking your finger, throwing it up into the wind and saying, it's this. I'm not super inclined to Aaron Renn's threefold thesis, primarily because I'm Augustinian. I
Mhm.
think that we are always in the negative world.
Mhm.
Okay. And we are always in the city of man. And so there's always complexities to, what we're facing. So, but even so, it's like, I mean, just even look at this last election cycle and how much more friendly, American culture and society is in some ways and in some circles, okay,
Yeah.
to our faith. So it's like, so what I would say to Aaron is like, well, are we in the negative world anymore?
Yeah.
You know,
Feel like-
so like I think that a lot of these things are cyclical, and there's ebbs and flows, and pendulums swing, tides go in, tides go out. I think that Rent's thesis is helpful for, like, if you're in the Bible Belt, or if you're in the Midwest or in the Rust Belt,
Yeah.
and you're trying to, like, assess, like, man, like, my community was more friendly to Jesus, like, and particularly if you're middle aged, Jesus, my community was more friendly to Jesus, like, the first half of my life than my second half of my life, of like, okay, what's up with that? But it's like, if you've been on either coasts, or if you've been in one of the top 25 metro areas, you're going to look at Ren's thesis and be like, I've been in the negative world my whole life. So I think that it does have some utility to it, but I'm not sure. I'm not sure I would build too much structure on top of that foundation.
Yeah, yeah, that's good. That's a good breakdown. One of the slides you put up was the GDP and religiosity chart, and I wanted to bring that one up specifically. And this is a little bit of a shameless plug for one of our future live streams. A guy named Per Ewert, who I think a mutual friend of ours connected me with him as well. But Per is the director of the Clapham Institute in Sweden, which is the only Christian think tank in Sweden. And in an extremely secular society, where he's going to be talking to us about what does Christian cultural engagement look like in Sweden, and what can Americans, who obviously on that chart are a much more favorable religiosity culture, learn from. Okay, but I mean, to Aaron Ren's, if we think that we're moving towards that negative world, okay, but we've got people serving faithfully in really secular societies, much more secular societies than what we're in today. What can we learn from that? So that was interesting, just to see Sweden GDP almost directly in line, but their religiosity
Yep.
way below that main line. So one of the other questions I had, I know we're at 108, so I want to start tying this up for us. We've been doing a lot of work recently with Brad Wilcox out of the University of Virginia and Institute for Family Studies,
Mm-hmm.
and tied into that Ian Rowe with his success sequence. And so
Mm-hmm.
you mentioned a couple things. If I can get my notes to go back to the first screen here. There we go. Specifically, the most likely to go to church are married with children, college degree. And I was like, well, that's exactly what we've been hearing from Brad on the value of marriage, the
Yep.
value of family. So I guess, and then related to the Harvard study with human flourishing, we've tied kind of that in as well with some of the success sequence and some of the Wilcox study. So I think there's going to be a lot of opportunity for us moving forward in our Hope in a Future initiative to continue to pull from some of the data that you're producing and say, okay, how do we encourage the good, the true, and the beautiful around marriage and family formation as a key institution in society? And how can the local church, as the outworking of God's kingdom and society, encourage marriage and family formation in communities, because those two seem to be just so tightly knit together. So I don't know if you wanted to take a minute and dive any further into those pieces, but the other piece that connected for me with that was we're working with an organization called Communio, because marriage and family formation, but they really emphasize outreach and evangelism relationally, meaning relational felt needs in the local community, and using data to help churches identify those felt needs and then come alongside and reach out to those individuals. So there's so much there that I was just resonating with as we're launching some of this. But that was not a question, that was almost more of a comment, but I think there's kind of a question baked in. And for me, that would just be curiosity around, if in our last couple minutes, do you have additional thoughts on the relational, the marriage, and any of these other studies from Brad, from Ian Rowe, from the Harvard Study for Human Flourishing that our pastors should be thinking about or digging into themselves?
Yeah, so I think the highest principle is this: birds of a feather flock together. And that's a knife that cuts both ways. On the one hand, we want to be encouraging more and more people, who are, who have nuclear intact families, to be, look, those people are going to be more low-hanging fruit, in terms of, coming to church, because there's going to be less cultural distance for them for what they find in most churches. Okay, not all. Now, where the knife cuts both ways is like, well, there's an awful lot of people who aren't in intact families, who aren't in that, that third and fourth quintile, that 40 to 80%, income, range. Like, well, what are the philosophy of ministry and missiological things that we are doing to engage the people who are where America's not working for them, or whether the relationship towards, institutions or even religious institutions has been strained, or what are we doing for people who have to work odd hours and more hours because they're just struggling financially? So, what are the paths? So we get a lot of those things kind of in the toolkit of just kind of getting some ideas on the table of like, okay, what can we do for kind of some of the rest of America? But yeah, we cite the success sequence, in the book, because basically, like, if America's working for you, the church is probably working for you as well, and vice versa. And so there's definitely, I think that there is a lot of low-hanging fruit for just kind of like the forgotten about people, or just folks, but it's hard because you come to church and it's like, look, I grew up lower middle class. I'm only second generation American. My family came here in 1946 to Detroit. My grandfather worked in the automotive industry in a blue collar fashion. My brother and I were the first college educated in our families. My dad grew up on a farm. Like the wind came through his bedroom. Okay. There's like holes in the slats, and his, the glass of water on his bedside table was frozen before midnight. And this is in Lansing, but like I carry with me every day that I'm lower middle class. Mm-hmm. I'm like financially and net worth, I'm not that today, but culturally that is still me. And I'm still like, this kid from rural Ontario, whose grandparents still live like they were in the Great Depression. And so when I'm in rooms of people who are in that upper quintile, I'm very uncomfortable. And in addition, most of those people, it doesn't matter if, I'm doing well for myself financially and I'm connected to these institutions or have, or I live in this neighborhood. There's still so I've done a little bit better for myself than like another key person in my life. Okay. But this other person in my life, he's welcome in a lot of rooms in my city of Orlando that I'm not welcome in. Mm-hmm. Okay. And so when we start to think about those things, and that's just class. Yeah. There's all sorts of other different ways of like where people can feel cultural distance, between other people. And so how do we make local churches that are more sticky, that can transcend all of the different ways where we can feel the tension of cultural distance. And so I think we have to think missiologically about that, because we don't live in one America anymore. There are hundreds of Americas.
Mhm.
And we've got to have strategies and tactics and missiological, pathways to being able to engage with people more where they're at, and not, lower the cultural distance that's there as much as possible.
That's good. That's good. All right. Well, last thing that I'll leave everybody with is, you mentioned student and young adult ministry being one of the key areas for churches to focus on. And next month for our live stream, we have Dr. Jeff Myers from Summit Ministry going to be talking specifically about student and young adult ministry, and how do we equip them with a cultural apologetic that both inoculates them from some of what they're constantly being bombarded by in this cultural catechism in this secular society, but also equips them to go out and be a light and be salt in their local communities, because we know that they are most likely the ones to reach their own age groups. Right? It's harder and harder for me as I continue to age to reach an 18-year-old. But man, if a strong, Jesus-loving, biblically centered 18-year-old is having a good conversation across a cup of coffee, much more likely that that's going to be a fruitful conversation. So I'm excited for that conversation with Dr. Jeff Myers next week. Michael Graham, thank you so much for investing your time with us today. We'll get all those resources posted out to our group. And I think this is going to be tremendously helpful, both for the people that were on today and then for everybody that's going to watch it in their future. So we'll look forward to staying in touch.
Thank you, Chris, and hey, thank you everybody for your attention and listening to me, and being partners in making some progress on this big issue.
Yeah, yeah. We'll look forward to the research when it comes out, and anything we can do to support in that, especially if there is an opportunity to create kind of an Ohio specific report. I think that'd be something we'd like to have the conversation about. So
Yeah,
all right,
I'd
everybody,
love to do that.
for your time today. We'll look forward to seeing you again next month.